Hi, welcome to the Mom Files, Moments of Motherhood podcast, a place where the hard things have room to exist without shame.
If you're a mom, you'll get realistic routines, gentle validation, and encouragement to try new things. We're here to be your village, a judgment-free zone for modern motherhood. Take what fits for you and leave the rest.
We're happy you're here. Let's jump in.
Welcome back to the Mom Files. Today, we are diving into cutting toxic family ties. Now, this could be for a lot of different reasons and bring up a bunch of different feelings for you and even people you are having struggles with. And so just to kind of really dive in, why is this such a taboo, hard to talk about topic, especially for moms and women? And I think part of it is, again, like this cultural family pressure around like, oh, but they're family, like, you're just supposed to kind of, we talked about in the last episode, they're your elders, like you just should respect them, things like that. But I always say, toxic is toxic and you shouldn't have to experience being treated a certain way just because someone is related to you. You deserve to feel loved, respected, and like your feelings are being met too. And so I think that's also important to note that family is not always safe or healthy, but we can sometimes be taught that way. I don't know. Hav, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's 100%. I think it's kind of every culture that I know of anyway, where, you hear it all the time, right? Blood is thicker than water, and we could get into like how that saying is used wrong. But I think it's that's a great example of how society basically, family can never go away because they're related to you. You can't get rid of them. They're the same blood as you or whatever. But in all reality, like, my family has like the same genetics as me, but that doesn't mean that, they can't do things that aren't toxic. Or I'm a firm believer in creating your own family, and friends can be more family than family can be because a lot of times they take that for granted and, well, blood is thicker than water. You should forgive me for this and that and whatever. But I think we should kind of get out of that if we can,
100%. Yeah. I think it can be really difficult to face family with toxic behaviors, especially like you can, like a lot of times we do still love them or have love for them. And so it can be hard to disconnect. And so when, what do you do when a connection, no matter how close, becomes toxic, especially if it's affecting your kids and yourself, your marriage life, that type of thing. And so I think let's dive into it. I know first, let's just start off by discussing that we aren't talking about like normal family conflict. Like
No.
all families fight, people argue, feelings get hurt. That's normal. Like this. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it's a family member or a partner, a child or friends, like there's normal family relationship conflict. But then sometimes I think that this is a little deeper than that. Like things that like manipulation or not respecting your boundaries, like doing nasty things that are beyond a normal disagreement. Like, for example, on my end, like I've had some things where people just made up really terrible lies and trying to pit each other against each other. And so for me, it came in different ways that I felt like were deeper than just like normal family stuff. Like, so I think we can kind of get into it. Like, what are signs of toxic behavior? I know, like, I can think of manipulation, gaslighting, lack of boundaries, disrespect. I don't know. Is there any that I missed that you can think of?
I don't think so, because I think you made a great point. Like, there's a disagreement and then there's toxic behavior. There's not necessarily seeing eye to eye with somebody, and then there's lack of boundaries or, like you said, manipulation, gaslighting. Just like straight going out of your way to make somebody's life a living hell. Like there's definitely levels to toxic behavior for sure. But I think those are definitely the main ones that I would call out. And just like you said, differentiating that like an argument or a disagreement or having different political views, as long as you can respectively figure those things out and like be around each other without making each other feel like out of place or unsafe, then it's, once you feel unsafe and feel like you aren't protecting your peace or you can't, like there's anxiety going into it or fear, stuff like that. That's when I think there's like a real clear indicator that the person that you're worried about is toxic and not just somebody that you maybe don't, like, get along with very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree because obviously, like, I've had disagreements with, like, my parents or, like, even Hob and I. We don't agree on everything, but I'm like, that's really different conflict than, like, I was blatantly trying to bring Hob down.
Yeah, well, like,
Like,
we could
secretly.
disagree about something, but I'm not gonna undermine you with other
Right,
people or talk negatively about you or spread rumors. I wouldn't spread any rumors, but, like, rumors that especially that are untrue,
right,
like, exactly, like, I could hey, but yeah, 100%. I mean, we live together, right? There's
right,
disagreements about, like, personal space and stuff like that, but that's, like, a difference of opinion and, like, whatever, but once boundaries were set, it's like, okay, your boundary might not work exactly with what I want my boundary to be, but, like, we worked on it
right.
together, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's a good example, and so to kind of, like, tag on what is maybe a sign of toxic behavior, so, like, we mentioned the gaslighting, the manipulation, like, I know for me, like, we just gave, obviously, examples of really calm, like, normal conflict, but, like, on my end, something that is a little, I would say, more gaslighting and kind of like a disrespect, and I
Mhm.
think they kinda come together, but I personally have put up multiple boundaries of cutting people off in my family due to awful behavior. Not just awful behavior, but no change behavior, absolutely zero ownership to their actions. Like, it's to me, it was a multiple things that kind of led up to, them continuing to cross the line as if nothing happened. And so with that, as they have no acknowledgement and things like that, I found it was time to like really look at those and be like, okay, this is beyond a normal conflict. This is really like toxic and it's time to move on. Like sometimes you just can't fix something and sometimes it's not worth your time and energy to fix something. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point of also in this discussion is maybe sometimes you could put in energy to try to fix some things, but also sometimes it's not, for lack of better words, not worth your time or energy, and it's better to just cut off. I know a lot of things. I think gaslighting is a really, like, maybe one of the most difficult things to cut off because it often, by definition, makes you second guess yourself, right? But, like, and manipulation and coercion and stuff like that can be a little bit more clear to see, not saying that it's, like, easier by any means. But I think for me, because you've had, like you said, you've had clear, like, people disregarding your boundaries to manipulating people around you to trying to gaslight you, things like that. Things that I've experienced are a little bit more about, like, the anxiety that it causes me to walk into a situation or having to avoid bringing my family around. There's certain things. I know mine was, like, my main example is a little bit less drastic and stuff, and I didn't end up cutting him out of my life, but I know a big one for me was my dad and, like, being like, discussions, like, not necessarily as a father and daughter, like, it sounds like it could be a lot worse than it was, but using me kind of as a therapist and then disagreeing with my choices of who I decided to make a family with and stuff, and we got past that pretty quickly, but the anxiety that came with, like, knowing that if I went to a family occasion, that my life was just that day was just gonna be ruined because the disagreements with my dad, and a lot more that goes into that, but I definitely think a part of it that we, I guess, didn't say is, like, the anxiety, even if it's not they're not clearly, like, gaslighting you or manipulating you, the disrespect or lack of boundaries for sure.
Yeah, and I think you made a couple good points. One, I totally agree with the gaslighting because I think not only does it make you second guess yourself, but they can turn it in a way that makes other people be like, "Well, why aren't you forgiving them?" Or why, like like turn it on you from other people. But I also think you made up a great point that with the anxiety, like that is definitely a sign that it might be time to step back. And so
Mhm.
I think that's something we should dive into is kind of like let's talk about, what are things that to step back because there is an array. Sometimes it's harder to recognize the signs. Like sometimes it is hard to recognize that you're being gaslit or manipulated. or maybe you think you are, but you're not sure. So there's other things that can affect you
Mhm.
that could also mean that you need to take a step back. Like Hav said, like the feeling super anxious, or maybe you feel guilty or scared or just grief. Like every time you're talking to them, you're like, okay, I need to walk away. I don't know. Hav, do you have any others?
Yeah. No, I think that and, like or also a big one, I feel like, is the fear of your child being treated the same way you were. I think a lot of us, or at least for me, I've seen that, like, the parents in my life have had the ability to see around the way they were maybe as parents, that they didn't like the way that they parented, and they're a lot better with their grandkids. But I think there's also a lot of grandparents, uncles, aunts, friends, cousins, whatever, who you might have had a relationship before with that were surpassing boundaries or manipulating or whatever, but didn't may not have, like, felt like as big of a deal when it was just you. But now that your kids are in the picture, your family's in the picture, I know for me, it was a big change when Tony came into my life, and then especially when Azzy came into my life, quickly realizing that, like, things that I thought were, like, kinda normal weren't. So I think listening to, like, your intuition, but also realizing, like, the fear that you have about somebody else being treated the way that you're being treated is a pretty clear indicator that you're not being treated right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you actually made a few good, like, there could be multiple red flags that it
Mhm.
might be necessary. And I think you make a good point. Like when boundaries are never respected, when the relationship is causing you from being healthy or present in your own life, or like you said, fearing for your kids or your spouse or whoever. And honestly, just like what like we talked about earlier, leaving you anxious, leaving you drained, questioning your worth. Like there can be so many different ways that red flags can come up. So it's definitely like listen to your, like Hoff said, listen to your intuition, listen to your gut. If you're like, this doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
Or even if you're not, like, a clear indicator this doesn't feel right, but it just feels off, by instinct, our bodies change and react. It's like the gut feeling, right? Like, listen to
Mhm.
your gut. But I think that's a really great thing with family is I feel like we usually tend to, like, overlook the way that we're feeling
Mm.
differently around people. But I know for me personally, the moment that I see your name pop up and I get that little feeling in my stomach that's like, "Oh, I'd rather not talk to you on the phone right now." Or,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a Sagittarius, so if you're into horoscopes, the moment that I'm like, "No," like, it's a dread to talk to you, it's usually because of something toxic in my body rejecting, like or not even fearing, but yeah, rejecting the conversation. So I think listening to your body, even if your brain is convincing you, again, gaslighting, your brain will convince you that you're wrong. I know there has been times, especially with you, Leah, where you're like, I need somebody who's not in this situation to tell me
Mhm.
if I'm reading this wrong or if I'm
Right. Am I
reacting
crazy?
it to it. Yeah, like, am I crazy or am I valid in feeling like
Right.
bitch is crazy? No, but seriously, am I valid in thinking that, like, this is not the way I should be treated? Because your brain might convince you, like, oh, like, well, XYZ. But as soon as your body is like, I'm not feeling right, then I think that's a very clear indicator that things need to be assessed.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's so true. Because, yeah, your brain might not be catching up, but your body definitely can give you indicators. And I know for me, it was a mixture of all of these things, all of the flags, all of the, not all the signs, but like, I just was like, I'm feeling icky every time I'm leaving. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling stressed out. Like, it feels like you're walking on eggshells because you're like, oh no, like, is this going to be misconstrued? And so, yeah, I felt like there was just a time where I finally was like, okay, I'm enough of feeling this way. It's time to finally put myself and my family's peace above other people, especially because these people clearly aren't caring about yours. So it's like, why are we continuing to spend so much energy towards something that they honestly, obviously don't care about? And so I think that kind of takes us into like, if it is like maybe you are thinking about cutting ties, what can that look like? And I know Hav mentioned it earlier. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You can do low limited contact or no contact. Like you can try your best to preserve the relationship as much as you can. Especially if you feel comfortable doing. No one can decide for you what's enough, like when enough is enough. So start with small boundaries before fully cutting someone off. I know, Hav, you could probably talk a little more about how you did this, in your own personal life.
Yeah, I know for me, I mean, I put up and, you figure out when it's right. But for me, and I was young when the particular situation happened. So it was really hard for me actually to figure out what to do and how to do it because I was literally like 18 and like figuring out my life.
Hmm.
But after like time and time, like I think my body and like I didn't want to be around my dad when he was upset because I knew that it was going to lead to me kind of having to sit there and talk to him and be that like emotional bag for him or whatever. And like I think a lot of us see that with our parents all the time, but for me it got to a point where I was like, well, this is clearly like this is things that like you need to talk to your friends about or you need to go therapy about. And so eventually I think and it was easier for me because when in my family when you turn 18, like dad kind of just stops helping you with everything. So I was like, okay, you're not paying my bills, you're not doing stuff. So I do have to recognize like how hard it can be to cut off certain toxic behaviors. But it got to the point where I was like, hey, like I will figure out what I need to figure out on my own. You can't talk to me about these things because I'm your daughter. If you're going to tell me that I'm a child, then treat me like a child, things like that. And a lot of it was just communication. My dad's like hard of hearing. Not actually hard of hearing, but he does. He likes to
Selective
think.
hearing.
Yeah, he thinks he's right about a lot of things, and we've talked about this, and he's doing so great and recognizing a lot of things. But that came from his children being like, "Hey, yo, like this is not okay." To when we were in college, a big blowout with Tony. We just,
Yeah.
don't know. But I knew in my gut that I was with like the man that I wanted to be with, and he was right for me. And my dad disrespected him, and then proceeded to send me an email basically being like basically saying I was a heathen. So I just responded to him and I was like, hey, like that was enough. I'm not going to sit in a room and be told that I'm something that I'm not. I'm pretty strong in my convictions of who I am. So I responded to the email and basically was like, hey, here's the boundary.
Hmm.
You can keep your personal thoughts to yourself. Your opinion is valid for you. However, don't talk to me about it. Don't come to him about it. And be respectful when I'm in the room. If you can't do that, I will just stop coming to family events. And for him, that was enough because he didn't want to lose his relationship with me. But that's not always enough for some people. So I think that was a great first step. And I would always suggest speaking to people in a way that they understand. Because with him, if it was an option, then we would have continued. But I, put that this is what's going to happen, and if it doesn't happen, this is what you can expect. Don't expect to see me at family events. Don't expect me to talk to you. Don't expect me to respect you the way that you would, if you're not going to respect me. Like, we're adults here. So,
Yeah, I think you made, or what you said was a few good points for helping, the process of letting go, which is one, having conversations. You don't have to silently step away. Like, and obviously you can pick and choose what feels best for you. Like sometimes it's like with Hop, it's worth having the conversation with them, letting them know, hey, this is what's happening. And maybe they will be finally willing to work on it, because they see you're serious and they're like, okay, like I do want to keep my kids in their life or whatever. So I'm going to take these steps to do it. But like Hop said, sometimes, no matter what you say or do, it's not going to help. And it kind of goes in one ear, out the other. And sometimes it is best to eliminate communication. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But
I think that's a really good indicator that the person is truly toxic.
yes,
With my dad, it was honestly like he has a lot of toxic behavior, but it was a mistake. He didn't really realize what he was doing. If the person truly loves you, when you put that boundary up, they're going to reassess. If they're not reassessing,
yeah,
bye.
100%. I think Hav, no, that's a great point. I'm glad that you said that because it is true. It's if they're and I guess this kind of actually goes into another point. I'll come back to my other one, but also be prepared for pushback, guilt, things like that, because I'm like, especially if they are someone that maybe doesn't respect you or is, you're questioning, like, do they really care? This is something that they can do, but also other family members. Like I said, if they're telling people like, no, this is actually what's happening, and they believe them over maybe your story, because it can be hard when there is two sides and they're both family members and that people love both parties. It can be hard for them to truly grasp your reasoning. And so, yeah, I think just remember that that's something that you can also experience. It's like not only might they not respect and they are probably toxic, but you might also get pushback. So just remember to speak on it, let them know your boundaries, and you can tell other people, other family members your boundaries too. Like, hey, by the way, I'm just distancing myself because of this. I've personally done that. Like, hey, I'm not going to come to this event because of, such and such. And that's whatever. Like, you're just going to have to you're allowed to set boundaries. And so don't forget to speak on them. And then also remind yourself that not everyone will get it. It's like what Hav said. They just might not understand. And in the end, you need to make the best decision for you and your family. And kind of what I said in the last, I don't know, maybe it was a couple episodes ago. Let people be wrong about you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, unfortunately, like in the end, people are going to believe what they want to believe, even if you have all of the evidence and things like that. And so hopefully the truth will prevail, but sometimes that doesn't happen and you still need to take the best course of action for yourself. Do you have a podcast and a pile of laundry staring you down? Are you questioning your life choices during nap time or working at midnight with one eye open and 3 tabs running?
Yeah, same. We've lived that chaos. Hey, still live in it. That's why we offer podcast editing and post-production services for the moms who have things to say, but zero time to do all the things. Let us help you get your voice out there without losing your mind, your message, or your weekend.
Think less burnout, more snuggles. Less tech stress, more talking to your audience in peace. Interested? Tap the link in the description to learn more. Plus, we offer free discovery calls, no pressure, just real talk to see if we vibe.
Let's make podcasting easier because you're already doing enough.
But just to backtrack a little bit, the other thing I was going to say that I think you made a good point on is definitely create a support system for yourself. So if you don't have family or people in your corner, definitely do that, whether it's therapy or friends or chosen family or whatever it is. Definitely consider additional support just because you shouldn't have to go through this alone. And you can chat about it with them. Like Hav said, like what I do with her, sometimes you need an outside party to kind of help balance.
I agree. I mean, I come to you, and I think the same thing is, for anything, but 100% is having that outside perspective, because I also feel like, especially with the pushback and the guilt of if they can get other people on their side, things like that, I think it's really helpful to be able to reach out and say, hey, like I said earlier, like, am I crazy? Like, is this something that I'm reading into or whatever? I have a lot of like toxic family stuff that's like just borderline red flag to where I'm like, okay, well, we kind of keep letting it happen. But I know I come to you all the time and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Please tell me that you think this is ridiculous too. Because if not, then I need to maybe I'm the problem. And I always feel like the problem. Like, it's just like the mom guilt thing, right? Like, I'm the issue.
Well, and that's where I think it comes back to like societal, cultural kind of aspect. It's like women just tend, I think, to feel more guilty about things like that because it's almost like our job to keep the family unit together. And so it can just feel,
exactly, like everything's our fault. But, and I too, because I know this isn't something that you or I necessarily deal with our kids, but I see a lot of the red flag behavior of like, oh, my parents watch my children and I ask them not to feed them certain foods or do certain things or whatever, and they're constantly going against what I say.
Mm-hmm.
And like, when does that turn from like, oh, it's just grandparents being grandparents to being like an actual really red flag? And I think that's important to bring up too, because of course we're a mom podcast, right? So like, at what point does like, oh, cute little, oh, but I'm the grandparent, like I'm supposed to give him sugar. When does that become something that's like, okay, now we need to cut this off? But then again, it's affecting your life because if parents are watching the grandkids and that's like your support system, it can get really tricky is basically what I'm saying. And we're not saying that like there's a right and a wrong way to do things, and it can be really difficult. And especially in situations like that, I think trying to be as clear on boundaries as you can be. And I know this sounds like, but like not an empty threat, but like, or threat, not the right word maybe, but letting them know that, like, if this continues, like, you'll have to do what you have to do to figure out a new care system for them or whatnot. But it can be as small as grandparents refusing to listen to your boundaries about if you have a schedule for your kid's nap, or if they're dye-free, or if they're gluten-free or dairy-free, or you don't want them watching certain TV or listening to certain music. There are boundaries there that can quickly become, "You're disrespecting me and you're making my child's life" doesn't seem unsafe, but really scary behaviors can come from certain diets for certain kids and stuff like that. So, I definitely want to call that out as well.
I think that is a really, really good addition because it is so true. It's not always just the stuff towards you and your family. Like, it could get deeper to people just not respecting how you're raising your kids. And even going out of their way to do things like maybe they don't ask you permission for things, or like they're just doing sly things behind your back. And maybe you don't know until your kid's like, oh, by the way, we did this, you know? And it's kind of like that's also you definitely hit the realm of toxic and like red flag. And I think that's a good time though when you start doing the process of communicating, like Hav said, setting the boundaries. Maybe you start talking to people being like, is this something that you think is a little extreme? Am I being over the top about it? Maybe this is something serious. And then, maybe you do start taking steps if they aren't respecting it to maybe you aren't fully cutting ties, but you're starting to limit the contact, or just you're changing things and maybe they'll start to get it. And if not, maybe that is the time you cut off. So I think it is a good point because it's not just, there can be a lot of different ways that these red flags can pop up when it comes to your family, especially when it comes to your kids. So, it just may be difficult, but you'll be amazed at how much peace you'll feel, life after you start cutting toxic ties or even limiting your contact or however you want to set your boundaries. Once you really start doing this, you'll be amazed how much space that leaves you to actually heal. Like, you're really starting to break the cycles for your own children, for yourself, and you don't have to go through the same cycles. So it just makes you really strong, and it's not easy to do. And so, if there were more people, like if it was easy to heal from generational trauma, everyone would be healed. And so just remember, you are not alone. If you're just personally dealing with this, like I've learned that not every battle is worth fighting for. And some are, like Hav mentioned, there might be some that are worth clinging on to, setting boundaries and trying to make it work. And sometimes there's just not. Like in my case, it's just easier for my mental health and my peace. Like, once it starts, like for me, when Ty and I sometimes start fighting over and stuff, that's when, once it's affecting your home life and things like that, sometimes it is important to decide where your energy matters most.
Mhm.
And like for me, that's protecting my kids, protecting my peace, protecting my partner's peace, those types of things. And so it's time to kind of let go of the rest. And so just kind of remember, like, cutting ties doesn't mean you don't love these people. It just means you love yourself enough to protect all of that. And so you do deserve that. Hav, do you have any additional?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point on that. And honestly, sometimes cutting them off or creating those extra boundaries is actually what they need to realize that they're not loving you the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it works out. But I would say, like I always say, protect your peace, protect your family. You know what's best for you and your family. And if you're like me, like we've said, when you're noticing toxic behavior or whatever, you can start with start with boundaries and start with discussing it. I'm big, like, I like to know that I did my best and I tried my best to create the best situation so that when it doesn't work out, or if it doesn't work out, then I feel not as guilty as, like, there's less things that could be on me. So, and I think you did that as well, is trying to figure out how you can make situations work. But like you said, once it gets to a point where there's arguments or
like your boundaries aren't being respected, like I say, please leave me alone. And then you continue to not leave me alone. It's really hard to want to continue trying to make things work.
When I think too, like, I know we're wrapping up, but that's a good point of, like, when you cut somebody off and they still don't respect the boundary of not talking to you anymore. Sometimes you do have to lead into being as drastic as blocking people and not attending events that they're at. So that's something to consider when you are thinking of these things. But yeah, protect your peace 100%. If it's causing you anxiety or taking over your life, then it is important. It's like, self-care. That's a big self-care piece.
Yeah. And so if this is something you are dealing with and you aren't sure how to set a boundary, like Hav said, you could start small, maybe start creating space between you and them. For example, maybe you've been doing a lot of direct contact, you see them every day and stuff, and that feels really draining. Start setting up a different way to interact. Maybe you just text, or maybe you meet in a public place instead of your house, just limiting your visits to a set time frame. So definitely and then if none of that's working and you're like, no, I'm at the next step where it's like, I'm ready to cut them off, definitely consider that conversation and then start taking those steps. Maybe it is time to just cut ties and things like that. So definitely do what you need to do for your peace. Like it's like what Hav said, do what's best for your family. So with that said, stick around for the next episode. It's going to be covering matrescence, which is a new term that we just learned about, but we definitely think it's worth talking about. It's kind of what happens to your identity when you become a mom. So it's not just hormones, it's like the whole transformation. And again, we will dive into it next week, and stick around, stay tuned for that for next week. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for sharing your time with us today. We're so glad you're part of this messy, beautiful village.
If this episode made you laugh, cry, or feel just a little more human, pass it on to a mom friend who needs it too. And hey, if you haven't already, hit subscribe and leave us a review. It helps more moms find the show and gives us a tiny dopamine hit. Let's be real.
Until next week, keep the kids alive and your coffee hot, or at least reheated once.